Okay, buen día, bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Welcome to this episode of El Rincón del Profe Jeff and our continued trip through Latin America and discovering different countries. Obviously, as you can see by today, bow down here a little bit so you can see the hat. This week is Chile, so we'll be exploring a little bit about that country in South America, part of the Cono Sur, the southern cone, with Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Chile. That will conclude it. This is our fourth in the series with Cono Sur. So as always, let me get this turned around so we can get down to business like we always do. But as usual, I like to bring the connection of what experience I have specifically with Chile and most importantly, the Chilean people. And so we'll start off with my connection from the time that I was living in Argentina. So we'll pull up the map. I will zoom down here into the bottom part of Argentina. When I lived in the island of Tierra del Fuego, I was there for about a year between two places, different times. I lived here in the north part of the island in a town called Rio Grande. And then later on, I lived in the southernmost town there called Ushuaia. So my first contact with Chileans in Argentina was here in Rio Grande, where I lived. As I talked about in a previous episode, one of the most common things back in those days, I'm sure they still are in some towns and cities, was for people that were spending, short periods of time in different places. This is way before Airbnb and that kind of thing. The boarding houses or pensiones were a common thing. And so in Rio Grande, the first place that I lived in Tierra del Fuego, I lived at a pension in a boarding house, and the people who ran the boarding house was a Chilean family. We'll get a little bit into this more later when we talk about the history of Chile, but they obviously weren't native of Argentina or Rio Grande. They were from an island in Chile called Chiloé. But like many countries we've dealt with up to now with dictators, especially during the 70s and 80s, Chile had a dictator from 1973 to around 1990, Augusto Pinochet. We'll again talk about him in a little bit. But when the dictator took power in Chile, that led a lot of people because a lot of people disappeared, just like we've talked about with all the dictators we've mentioned. It's a sad part of history of all these countries, but many people would disappear or be put in prison for opposing the regime, and so people that could have been on some type of a watch list, many of them just exiled to other places. And since Argentina was such a close place, many of them exiled from Chile into Argentina, which is kind of you think, well, why would they go from one place where there's a dictator to another place where there's a dictator? A lot of it depends on the time that they did that, because remember, in Argentina's history, by 1982, 83, the military dictatorships had fallen. And so a lot of the exiles from Chile came in after that time. And so Rio Grande was an important place for me in getting to know Chileans because I lived with them on a daily basis. The food that we ate was more Chilean than it was Argentine. And listening to their Spanish and getting to know their customs was fun for me because it was a different way than I'd been used to up to that point in Argentina. Also met many Chilean families in Ushuaia who had also come for the same reason, exiles from Chile into Argentina to find a place where they could be safe. And many of them still had families back in Chile, and so they would communicate with them. It was very treacherous for them. I remember the family I stayed with or lived with in Rio Grande, they would try and go back frequently, but the whole family wouldn't travel together because they were afraid that something would happen to the entire family. So they went one or two people at a time, and it was always overland through buses and things like that, which you can imagine from Tierra del Fuego. It meant traveling up here to the Straits of Magellan, which are right here. And then there are ferries, balsas, they call them in Spanish, that go back and forth across the Straits of Magellan to transport people and commerce and trucks and cars, all that kind of thing. So that's where my first connections with Chile came. So let's dive into a little bit more about Chile. I also had a good friend during college who was from Chile, and I'll talk more about that as we visit more about Chile. But here, let's jump into the geography a little bit. You can see, let me zoom out a little bit more. There's South America again, Latino America. And you can see that Chile runs from way up here on the border with Peru and Bolivia all the way down to the southern point in the south by Tierra del Fuego, as we just saw. Just to kind of put this in perspective, from top to bottom in Chile is just over 2,600 miles. And from side to side, the widest part is just over 100 miles wide. So it's a very, very thin, very long country. To put it in perspective, if you think of the distance between East Coast and West Coast in the United States, that distance is just over 2,600 miles if you're to follow it straight across. And so when you think of Chile, so the distance from top to bottom is just like going from East Coast to West Coast in the United States. Very unique as far as, because it is such a lengthy country. And up in the north here, this is the region known, and again, all of these things I've included in the video description below, so check out the videos, check out the links there, so you can get to see the different parts of Chile. Always we talk about the 3 P's plus people, the productos, products, perspectivas, perspectives, and prácticas, practices, along with people. Again, the images and things are being used in here for educational purposes only. So I hope you enjoy what we learned about Chile today. So this northernmost part is well known by many people. It's called the Atacama Desert, Desierto Atacama, one of the driest deserts on Earth. And many people ask, well, why is it so dry if it's right here next to the ocean? Well, there happens to be a very cold current called the Humboldt Current, which comes straight across here and hits. So there's not a lot of humidity. When you get up into the mountains and stuff, then moisture does appear in the form of clouds and things like that. But very, very dry, arid area through here. Although there is, and you'll see in the video, one of the videos in the video description, the diversity that does exist in the desert. If you can imagine, there are flamingos that live there, and many other things. One of their most important products that is produced in Chile is cobre in Espanol. And there's a huge mine up here in the northern part of Chile called the Chuquicamata. And there's information about it in the video description below, so check that out. So the northern part pretty arid and dry. So in the central part, in Central Valley area, you'll see Santiago. That will be the capital. Right, it's right at the foot of the Andes Mountains, and very close to the coast. We'll visit about that in a second here. Then we come down to the southern, kind of another south central part called the Lake District, where one of the big activities in Chile is timber, lumber, and you'll see that as well. Here's the island of Chiloé, which I mentioned that the family that I've lived with in Argentina was from. Down here where we have fjords, which are similar to what we find in southeast Alaska or over in Norway. One of the big products that's important here would be salmon, salmon. So there's a lot of salmon fishing or farming and fishing that goes along in here. As we move further south, we get into the Patagonia and the Magallanes region. See, these are glacier-covered mountains. We'll have pictures of the Torres del Paine National Park. So imagine this being just like Alaska if you've been there in the United States, and everything in between. And talk real quick about, I did visit Chile on one occasion. As part of my job, making sure I get this not covered up by, I visited a couple of schools in Santiago. This has been some time ago. Beautiful city. You'll see in the picture here in a sec that it's set against the Andes Mountains, which perpetually have snow on them. We'll talk more about that later, but I also visited a couple places. This second largest city in Chile is called Valparaíso. In English, we always say Valparaíso, but in Espanol, it's Valparaíso, which is a very important port city. Visited the Catholic University there, and then there's also a university in Viña del Mar, which is out here on the beach. Viña is a vineyard. So this is a very important road from Santiago down to Valparaíso, of course, because of all the commerce that comes in from Valparaíso. But also in here is where a big percentage of the vineyards exist in Chile. So Chile is an important wine producer. So for you wine connoisseurs, obviously there's going to be information in the video description so you can check out what it looks like through this valley, and some hints on enjoying wine if that's something you do. I have to say that one of the reasons that I wear all these different hats was because of the trip that I took to Santiago and to Valparaíso and Viña del Mar, because I didn't take one with me to Viña del Mar, and after I was done with my meetings, I went and took a walk along the beach down here and ended up getting super sunburnt because I didn't have my sun protector and I didn't have any hats. So after that experience, I got a hat, and I always keep different hats in my backpack wherever I go so that I won't have that experience again. So that's where the La Gorra, Las Cachuchas, that's where the hat collection that I have started, was from when I was in Chile. Okay, so real quick, a little bit about history. The independence was declared the 18th of September in 1810 with San Martin, who we talked about with the Argentina as being one of the liberators. Bernardo Higgins was also an important figure in their history, and you can, again, check all that out in the video description below. So I'm going to take a second, pull up the pictures, but one thing that I would like to mention about the Chileans, as we've talked about before, the big influence that dictators have had on all of these countries that we've been visiting, with Pinochet, and his picture will come up at the end of the presentation. It's kind of, with all of them, there's a love-hate relationship for many people. Obviously, those that were in favor of the things that he did were supportive. On one side, he did provide huge economic growth for the country, but on the other hand, many civil liberties were taken from people, and there were many political prisoners, and of course, all kinds of exiled Chileans. I'm not aware of, now that he's out of power, as to whether my friends that I met in Argentina ever ended up going back to their hometowns. I hope they were able to do that, because that was something that they longed to do. So, all right, well, let's take a quick tour by photos. This is our first one here, is the picture of Santiago. You can see there, modern city at the foot of the Andes. For those of you who love skiing, remember that because Chile is in the southern hemisphere, it's going to be opposite of what we are here in the United States. So in June, July, August into September, those would be skiing months if you want to check that out. I did include a couple of videos for those who might like those extreme sports. But for some great museums, I traveled to a couple of museums in the couple of days that I was there in Santiago. Archaeological museums, because remember where they're at, they were part of the northern part of Chile, was included in the Inca Empire. And we'll talk about a little bit in a minute about the Mapuche indigenous group, which are the First Nation folks that live in Chile. Because of Chile's location, we should mention that there are many earthquakes, terremotos, along here. It's on the Pacific Rim, and so we'll see pictures of volcanoes here. But I was there when they had a temblor, and in all the buildings there are warnings about what to do in case of a terremoto, an earthquake or seismic activity. On the map, you'll remember us talking about the second largest city being Valparaíso, an important port right there in central Chile. Very colorful. If you go there, be prepared to walk up and down. They also have little cable cars, funcular railways that go up and down in the neighborhood, so you don't have to climb all the stairs, although you could get some good exercise. This is a picture of one of the beaches in Viña del Mar. It's an important cultural center, and one of the products that we, or practices and products that we talk about, is la música. And every year near the end of February, in Viña del Mar, they have a Festival de la Internacional de la Canción, International Song Festival, and they have artists come from all over the world, not just in Spanish. I've included the link in the video description below, so you can check out who has been there in the past, because they're, I was just browsing through some of them, and one of my favorite bands was Journey from the 80s. They've been to this festival. Big names like Shakira has been to this festival, Mark Anthony, Pitbull, all those kinds of artists. So if you get a chance, check it out. It's live always during the last week or so of February. So Festival Viña del Mar, it's called. Okay, this is just one of many pictures that I could have included for the Atacama Desert. You can see super barren, but you can see in the background far away there are some mountains with snow on them. Again, one of the most arid places on Earth in the northern parts of Chile. Traveling to the polar opposite end, almost, this is a picture of a place called Las Torres del Paine in National Park in the Patagonia area of southern Chile. huge destination for people who like to go hiking and explore wildlife. Again, some excellent footage in our video description below. Probably should have put this up by Santiago. Sorry for my not coordinating this as well, but here's a picture of just one of many vineyards in Chile producing their vino and also grapes. I go frequently. Of course, in our winter time, it's going to be their summer or fall. Our winter is their summer, our spring is their fall. So when it's harvest time, we get a lot of their produce up here. And I bought some Chilean grapes that were huge a couple of weeks ago that we had for an instructor orientation. So I'm always encouraging students as you go to the store, whatever store it is, check out the produce, because many of the produce that we get in our off season comes from Latin America, whether it be Chile or Argentina. You'll see apples and grapes and pears and peaches, those kinds of things that come from all of these places. Okay, this is a picture of, it's called Caldillo de Congrio, and Caldillo de Congrio is the national dish of Chile, and I remember eating this with the family I lived with in Rio Grande. Essentially, it's a fish chowder, but the fish that they put in there is called a conger. It's an eel, and many of us don't like, well, we don't, not common to eat eel, but the congrio is very common along the coast. We should say, remember, the coast of Chile is 2,600 miles-ish long, and so seafood and fish are going to be an important part of their diet. I've included in the video description a little bit about, there's a recipe on preparing it. You don't have to use congrio or conger if you can't find it, but you can use it with any fish that you like to eat. So one of the products. Okay. One of the other products that we mentioned was copper and mining. This is a picture of the world's largest open pit copper mine called Chuquicamata. There's two mines in the world that claim they're the biggest. One is Chuquicamata. The other is the Kennecott copper mine in Bingham, Utah. One is deeper, one is wider. So the one in Utah is the deepest, and this one I think is the widest, is how they've arranged that. But you can see that it's a huge place. A lot of copper, cobre, plata, silver, and oro come out of these places. And it's, again, one of their cheap exports. Let me jump out of the pictures here for a minute. One of the, it doesn't want to, having some technical issues here, just a sec, bear with me. Okay, my apologies for the technical glitches there. I'm trying to do these podcasts as quickly as I can, so I don't like to edit a lot, but in any event, bear with me as we go. But I wanted to comment a little bit about the mining industry in Chile. I put some information in the video description below. Some of you may remember back in, I think it was around 2010, it wasn't in this mine, it was in another Chilean mine, that 33 miners were trapped half a mile underground or more for it was over 2 months that they spent enclosed in the mine, and a huge rescue effort was mounted. In the video description, I shared some videos, and there's a link to a trailer on a video or a movie that came out in theaters in the U.S. that recounts that story. So that just kind of gives you the perspective of what it would be like for you if you were a family of a miner or your family mined, because in the northern part of Chile, that's what many people are involved in. And there are other videos and things about the Chuquicamata mine and the huge trucks that you saw on that on the picture that we had about the mine. So again, yeah, just check all those out. So I'm going to be looking back and forth here. I have another screen where things are mounted, and then our presentation one. So I'll be going back and forth here for a sec. All right, so not the map. Back to the pictures. Okay, so one of the practices and products we can combine some of these two is this national dance called La Cueca, and I don't know if you could. I'll show this in a second over my shoulder, but traditional dance that's celebrated. Obviously, it will be danced on their Independence Day, 18 de septiembre, and in other national festival or fiestas patrias, as they say, especially for Independence Day. There are a couple of videos in there. One of them is very good about teaching you how to dance. I'm not a great dancer, but if you would like to learn how to do the cueca, please go ahead and give that a shot. I wanted to bring in this that I have back here. This was a gift from a former student of mine, and it kind of combines the last two things that we've been talking about. You'll see on the bottom it says Cueca, Baile Nacional Chile, but it's a depiction of the dance that we saw in the picture, but it's done on a very thin sheet of copper metal, which is mounted on some wood, and you can just see the also up at the top there's the Chilean flag, La Bandera Chilena. So some good memories from that, but also a show here of two of the important products, el baile, la cueca, also a práctica, and then the copper that comes from Chile. All right, and back to our pictures. This is just a picture of the scenery or the event what we talked about earlier with Viña del Mar. This is the Festival Internacional de la Canción, held at the end of every February. I've never tried it, but I'm going to try and do it this year. I'm recording this podcast in mid-February, and if you're watching in the festival in February of 2025 was held or will be held from the 23rd to the 28th, so it's a week long, different artists every night, and they actually award different premios, awards, and their award is called the Gaviota. Gaviota in English is a seagull, so it's a statue of a seagull that they give. So they give out awards for best folklore, best like country, best rock, all that. So they have different categories, and people compete throughout the week, and at the end of each night and at the end of the week they award different gaviotas as people participate. So if you get the chance, either watch the replays, or there are obviously ways to see it live streaming. Okay. One of the other products we talked about was the Salmon in the central southern part of Chile. This is a picture of a salmon farming operation. You'll see in the video descriptions below, I put that under. There's some under under products, but I also put it under practicas because the videos that I found, which are very interesting, share how Chile is trying to be sustainable because over the years, salmon farming has gone through different phases of, hey, it's great, and hey, it's bad for the environment, and the videos that I share there talk about how they're trying to make it be a sustainable process that doesn't harm the environment like it used to. So I think you'll find that interesting. Now to talk about some of the people, you'll see here, this is a picture of Gabriela Mistral. She was an important educator and ended up being a diplomat in the 1900s in Chile. She actually was the first Latin American author to win the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1945. Actually, she happens to be one of my favorite authors from Latin America, and it's important because she was she was the first author in Latin America, but it's interesting that she was also female, which really didn't happen back in those days. So an important figure in Chilean history. So check out the videos in the description that talk about her. Another important author, also a Nobel Prize winner. I believe he won the Nobel Prize in 1971. This is Pablo Neruda. Many of you may know him already from some poemas de amor and things like that. One of my favorites. Some of my favorite poetry of his are his odas, the odes, and this is a book of several of his selected odes in English and Spanish. I'm going to read one to us here near the end. But also worked as a diplomat and became world famous for his poetry to this day. The last image, and probably one of the most polarizing, was someone we've already talked about, and that's Augusto Pinochet, who came to power in 1973. A little bit about the history, and again, there are more videos in the description about the history of Chile, both before and after Pinochet, and also while he was in power from 1973 to 1990. But prior to his dictatorship, Chile had elected, I'm going to jump out of the pictures here and just talk to you for a sec. Prior to his dictatorship in 1973, Chile had elected what became the first, and this is an important step in Latin American history and politics, they elected the first socialist president, whose name was Salvador Allende, and he was elected in 1970, I believe, was when he won the elections. And of course, this didn't sit well with many powers that be, and you'll see in the histories there that the United States, especially the CIA, was involved in bringing Pinochet to power to lead the coup to overthrow the Allende government, and then Pinochet was established as the dictator for many years. Which affected everybody's life in Chile, obviously, and thousands of people were exiled, and hundreds were disappeared. And we talked about the friends that I knew in Argentina that left Chile to not live under this regime. But many people obviously thrived under the dictatorship because, as I mentioned earlier, his policies led to a huge economic boost for the country, and so many people thrived under the things that he did. And again, it's hard to balance that kind of progress with the civil rights abuses that also took place. Actually, not too long after he came to power, Pablo Neruda, they say he had a heart attack and died, but there are some who also believe that he may have been poisoned because he was a supporter of Salvador Allende with things that his beliefs and things like that. So, again, those are perspectives. I'm not going to say one way or the other which one is best or better. History tells its own tale with that. I do remember, though, that in 1989, 1990, I was an undergraduate at that time, and one of my best friends in school was from Chile. He and I took Spanish classes together. He was also majoring in business. But we were talking about what was going on in Chile, and Pinochet, as they call him, was getting old, and he said, well, we're going to open up to have democratic elections. And one of my friend, his name was Patricio, one of Patricio's jokes was the election will be, and I'll say it first in Spanish and then do the English translation. He said, and on the ballot, Pinochet is going to put sí para sí me quedo, o no para que no me vaya. So he said the option would be yes, so I will stay, speaking as if he were Pinochet, right? So Pinochet said, you can vote yes for me to stay, or no, so I won't go. And so it was kind of like, well, no matter what happens, I'll still be here. But there was an election, and he was voted out, obviously, and he actually went into exile in another country after that because of what had gone on in Chile. So, like many of the countries we've talked about, histories that have taken people up and down, but throughout all of that, the Chilean people have resisted. One of the most resistant groups in Chile, and there's an interesting video in the description below for you to check out, is on the Mapuche indigenous group, about how they're trying to regain some of their ancestral lands that were lost throughout their years of progress, or throughout the years of history in Chile. So lots for us to learn, a lot to appreciate about Chile, a lot we can learn from them. If you do get the chance to, maybe you know someone from Chile or you are from Chile, please share in the comments below your thoughts on that. And as always, I like to close with something from their literature. And so since Pablo Neruda is one of my favorite authors, and I actually wrote a bunch of papers as I was a student on his poetry. And to do this, I'm going to switch hats. This is my Pablo Neruda hat. You saw his picture. Change of hats, change of mind, I guess. But one of his tendencies, and he had several books on odes, but he liked to write about the common things in life. So if you're to look at his poetry, you might see an ode to the tomato or an ode to the onion, the common foods that people eat in Chile. I remember one that's ode to the alcachofa, the ode to the artichoke. But one of my favorites was ode to, it's called Oda a la Luz Marina. So it's ode to the lights on the sea, or the light on the sea, about how the moon casts its rays down on the ocean at night, which would be something that every Chilean sees when the moon is up. But I selected to read one called, because the national dish in Chile is the Caldillo de Congrio, that conger chowder, the fish chowder. So I pulled out here the ode to the conger chowder. I'll read it first in Spanish. It's fairly short, and then we'll do it in English. And with that, we'll close out this episode. So, Oda al Caldillo de Congrio. En el mar tormentoso de Chile vive el rosado congrio, gigante anguila de nevada carne. Y en las ollas chilenas en la costa nació el caldillo, grávido y suculento, provechoso. Lleven a la cocina el congrio desollado, su piel manchada cede como un guante, y al descubierto queda entonces el racimo del mar, el congrio tierno, reluce ya desnudo, preparado para nuestro apetito. Ahora recoges ojos, acaricia primero ese marfil precioso, huele su fragancia iracunda. Entonces deja al ajo picado caer con la cebolla y el tomate, hasta que la cebolla tenga color de oro. Mientras tanto, se cuecen con el vapor los regios camarones marinos y cuando ya llegaron a su punto, cuando cuajó el sabor en una salsa formada por el jugo del océano y por el agua clara que desprendió la luz de la cebolla, entonces que entre el congrio y se sumerja en gloria, que en la olla se aceite, se contraiga y se impregne. Ya solo es necesario dejar en el manjar caer la crema como una rosa espesa y al fuego lentamente entregar el tesoro hasta que en el caldillo se calienten las esencias de Chile y a la mesa lleguen recién casados los sabores del mar y de la tierra, para que en ese plato tú conozcas el cielo. Talks about how it's being prepared, doesn't it? You might recognize that when you watch that video. Now in English, Ode to Conger Chowder. In the storm-tossed Chilean sea lives the rosy conger, giant eel of snowy flesh, and in Chilean stew pots along the coast was born the chowder, thick and succulent, a boon to man. You bring the conger skin to the kitchen, its mottled skin slips off like a glove, leaving the grape of the sea exposed to the world. Naked, the tender eel glistens, prepared to serve our appetites. Now you take garlic, first caress that precious ivory smell, its irate fragrance, then blend the minced garlic with onion and tomato, until the onion is the color of gold. Meanwhile, steam our regal ocean prawns, and when they're tender, when the savor is set in a sauce combining the liquors of the ocean and the clear water, released from the light of the onion, then you add the eel, that it may be immersed in glory, that it may steep in the oils of the pot, shrink and be saturated. Now all that remains is to drop a dollop of cream into the concoction, a heavy rose, then slowly deliver the treasure to the flame until the chowder are warmed, the essences of Chile, and to the table come newly wed the savors of land and sea, that in this dish you may know heaven. So with that, we'll say adios for the moment to Chile. We'll probably visit different aspects of Chile again in the future, and hopefully get to have someone from Chile be a guest with us. As always, the takeaway that we want to have from our experience with learning about these countries is that we appreciate the products, the perspectives, and the practices of these people and what they bring to us and how we can incorporate those into our lives moving forward. So until next time, this is Profe Jeff. I hope you enjoyed it. Adios.